We forecast prices and fundamentals. Whether you're a trader, producer, or consumer, you can hedge your bets with Montel's diverse forecasting portfolio. Contact us at sales@montelnews.com for more info and a free trial.
Hello listeners and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast. Bring energy matters in an informal setting. In today's pod, we look ahead to Sunday's general election in Germany and what it could mean for the country's energy policy. Would a government that included the Green Party stop Nord Stream 2? Could Germany's coal exit be speeded up? And who would roll out more renewables? So joining me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss these issues and much more is Henning Gloystein from Eurasia Group. A warm welcome to you, Henning.
Thank you, Richard. It's great to be with you again.
And this time in person, so we're very, very, very privileged to have
exciting.
you here. If I could just start off, Henning, to say there are obviously three parties in the running here for the chancellorship, and they're all polling around 20%. Is that right?
So the latest poll I've seen is actually the SPD is now at around 26%. But it's true then you've got the CDU, CSU who are polling around 22%. And then you have the Greens who are around 17, 18%. Which is a remarkable reversal of polling and of public opinion, because just 6 months ago, the CDU was neck and neck with the Green Party, and the SPDs, so the Social Democrats, were nowhere near close to being seen as potentially winning these elections.
And what's the main reason for this turnaround?
There's two big reasons that we see is within the Conservatives, the Christian Democrats, there was a race between Laschet, the current Chancellor candidate, and the Prime Minister of North Rhine-Westphalia, and the CSU Prime Minister of Bavaria. Within Germany and within the polls, Mr. Soda of Bavaria was much more popular, whereas within the Conservative Party, the CDU, Laschet was more popular. So they made a party decision rather than a poll decision, and that backfired. It was a very similar situation within the Green Party. On a national level, Baerbock's co-head of the Green Party, Habeck, is more popular, whereas internally, Baerbock is more popular. And so they went with an internal candidate, which again backfired. Whereas Scholz from the Social Democrats is fairly unpopular within the Social Democrats, but he's superbly popular within Germany. And that is basically what pushed him ahead.
Amazing turnaround there. But it looks like there are many constellations that are possible here. Could you talk us through those? Because maybe the listeners aren't aware of, for example, the Traffic Light Coalition or the Jamaica Coalition. Are there others?
Yeah, they've got funky names, don't they? So the Traffic Light Coalition would be a leadership under Scholz, the Social Democrats, in coalition with the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats, and their party logo is yellow. That would be a fairly centrist government, which would probably see a fair bit of continuation of politics, of current policies. The biggest problem there is that the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats really don't get on. They are, I wouldn't say in fundamental opposition to most things, but they're both centrist parties, but they really don't get on many things. The Liberals want to lower taxes, the Greens want to raise them. The Liberals are very much against market interference, including in energy matters, and the Green Party, of course, wants to hike its climate ambitions. So that would be an awkward internal coalition, but externally they're all pro-European and committed to climate change, for instance. Then if you have a left-leaning coalition, you could see the Social Democrats form a coalition with the Green Party and the Linkspartei, which are fairly straightforward to the left. That would be a break with consensus. It would be a break with usual German politics. The Linkspartei is Europe skeptic. They're anti-NATO. They have a strong pro-Russia wing, and they're an old-school leftist party. I wouldn't call them a radical party anymore, but that would be a break with Germany's modest and moderate traditions in politics, and would see a fair bit of uncertainty. And so those are the big leadership, or the most likely outcomes at the moment. If the Conservatives under Laschet turn this around and win the elections, that would be a very continuous politics. Laschet is very much like Merkel in a, I would say, slightly less inspiring version, but a continuation of what everything she did. Of course, they would probably have to go into a coalition with the Green Party, which would mean some compromises on climate politics, definitely.
And Merkel came out and endorsed him quite recently, which is the first time she actually did so. Yeah.
Yes, I think she felt the urge to save the ship from sinking.
Absolutely. Which of these outcomes and constellations are more likely, Henning?
That is a tough call at the moment. I just this morning talked to our regional analysts. So we currently officially still have the CDU as winning the election, although they're slightly behind the polls. But there's the sort of 5% turnaround that pollsters see in Germany, that the leading or the governing party at the last day still gains a few percentage points. My gut feeling actually says, though, I think Scholz will win it. So the Social Democrats. So the current vice chancellor will become chancellor, and the Conservatives have to go into opposition for the first time in decades. So I think the most likely outcome is the Ampel coalition. So the Social Democrats leading a coalition with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats.
The traffic light one. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And slightly behind that, the left-wing coalition, so red, green. But that would cause quite a strong public backlash, because while they might have the figures, the numbers to form a government, it is not a very popular choice in the German public.
So do you think the SPD would prefer to go in with the FPD and the Greens, or with the lefts and the Greens? I mean, what do you think? What's the feeling within the Social Democrats there?
That's the tricky part. So Scholz definitely prefers a moderate coalition with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. He's of the centrist liberal wing within the SPD. But a significant number and share of the SPD is left-leaning and would certainly prefer a swing to the more traditional leftist form of politics. So that's a debate, an internal debate that would probably break out into the open if Scholz actually wins the election. And very hard to say who will win that. But my gut feeling is it would be a coalition with the Greens and the Liberals.
But it's certainly going to be many weeks after the election, and this is going to roll really until you find, actually the horse trading, the bargaining, the negotiations, sitting around the table, ironing out these differences and what's going to happen. So when do you expect a government to be in place?
Could be months. I mean, last time it took months. So it could be Christmas, could be in 2022, which is awkward because, of course, you've got COP coming in November, the global climate talks. And if the EU doesn't have Germany on the table, that becomes a bit awkward. Yeah. Although some people say that France is actually hoping that exactly that happens, because it would put the leadership firmly to Paris rather than to Berlin. So that's who knows. But it could take months. The Liberals want to play a strong role. The Green Party don't want to back off. So, and they have very opposing ideas. And then, of course, the Linkspartei, the left party, might also have a word to say.
Throw a spanner in the works there, yeah. But Henning, before we go on to what this could mean for energy policy in Germany, which is, of course, Europe's biggest energy market, and what happens in Germany is of vital importance to not only its neighbours, but also countries beyond Europe. But there's early support for the non-major parties. Do you think that will fade as the election comes close, as we come close to, as people go to the polls on the Sunday morning, and they maybe go back to the SPD or to the CDU, CSU?
So that is what our regional analysts currently expect, is that there will be a very late jump for the Conservatives because they're in power. People are used to them. People know that Laschet is very much like Merkel. He has had a decent run governing Germany's biggest state, North Rhine-Westphalia. So he might receive a jump, but that is why our regional analysts actually still favor him over Scholz. Sorry. Then again, of course, Scholz is vice chancellor. Everyone knows him. He's very well respected. So I think he could gain even more as well. Whereas there's a significant chance that the Green Party still lose a couple of percentage points. And then, of course, if you look to the smaller parties, the Linkspartei has a slight risk of falling below 5%. They're currently at 6 or 7. So, I mean, that's not outside the impossible. And then whereas the Liberals, they look fairly stable around 11, 12%. I'd be quite surprised if they jump to 15 suddenly. They've never done that. There's just not a voter base for that many Liberal Democrats in Germany.
But in terms of energy policy, and you said if there was a continuation with the CDU, with Laschet in power, that would see current policies a continuation of that. But what if you had more of a left-wing constellation? Would that result in a bigger shake-up for energy policy? And in which direction do you think that would go?
Yeah, I actually think in energy and climate policies, that's one of the biggest potentials for change happening soon, because if we start on the left, if it was red, green, that would almost certainly result in a much more ambitious climate policy action from Berlin. You mentioned earlier maybe they would pull forward the 2038 coal phase out, which is, 2038, it's a bit silly, especially if you look at carbon prices. The coal exit in Germany will be much earlier, whatever the law is, because of the carbon price. But the Greens will push aggressively for a much earlier exit. The Linkspartei is very much in favor of Nord Stream 2.
Okay, because of the Russian wing in the party.
Indeed.
Yeah, the pro-Russian, yeah.
And of course, Nord Stream 2 is a bit of an SPD project, as a Schroeder thing.
The former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a left-leaning coalition would almost certainly see Nord Stream 2 be put in place quite fast. The traffic light coalition would, I suspect, also see Nord Stream 2 happening. The Greens would try and sort of bulldoze over the Liberals who want to phase out subsidies in renewables. They would probably try and keep them. But that would be the coalition riding of that, like I said, of that government would be complicated. Whereas if it was Conservatives and the Green Party, so under Laschet and with the Green Party and maybe the Liberal Democrats, I think you would see pretty much a continuation of now. Again, maybe with an acceleration, because the Green Party in government must do something on climate. It's a deal breaker if they don't. So speed limit, I suspect, will happen in any way, which is irrelevant for the world, but for Germany it's very relevant. And I do expect the coal phase out to be accelerated.
And how about the rollout of renewables? Is there much space in Germany for more wind farms and solar farms, and who would take on that policy?
And they all have to do something. Germany's last 6 nuclear reactors are going off next year. That's part of the reason why the power prices are so high in Germany now. It's literally not tomorrow, but it's next year. It's a few months from now, and that is also why Nord Stream 2 has a certain role to play. But in the long term, I mean, we published a note on this recently. If you look at the fossil fuel prices and the carbon price, the signal is very clear. You need to invest into renewables and storage solutions in Germany, like now. There is space for it, yes, and there's a need for it. The positive news is that there is a lot of, especially offshore wind capacity being built right now. The Global Wind Energy Council put out their report yesterday. There's a big development pipeline there. And crucially, although this is never mentioned in the election campaigns, but it's because there's consensus, is the hydrogen strategy. The Left Party, the Social Democrats, the Green Party, the Conservatives, and the Liberals all agree that clean hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, must form part of the industrial policy of Germany in the next 20 years. So that's unshakable, I think.
So we're recording this a little bit ahead of the election. So when you say the Global Wind Council, they put this out in early September.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. I'm just wondering here about the Greens. Like in the summer, there was a lot of talk about, alarm bells ringing about Nord Stream 2. If you got Baerbock in as Chancellor, she would put a stop to it. She'd cut that. Do you think, is there a chance of that happening?
It's a low chance because, you see all the headlines at the moment that the pipeline's finished or about to be, literally the last screw being tied to it. So it would be a real political almost scandal if that never gets put into operations. It's a massive white elephant under the ocean if that happens. And like I say, it is whether one likes it or not, and whether it was a mistake or not to even build it in the first place and not build something different. But the gas in the short term is needed. So I don't think it will be totally stalled, but you can do naughty little things like put an environmental review on it. If the Green government comes in and they want to cause some problems and see that they're doing something against gas, they could say that we need to do a last environmental review of gas pipelines and methane emissions, and they take a terribly long time in Germany, those reviews. And
exactly.
So if they really want to try and do that, I think they could delay it by several years.
Yeah, these things don't happen overnight. These
no, especially not in Germany.
You have a lot of T's to cross and I's over the dots over the I's. But what do you think? Do you expect a more ambitious climate policy under a coalition with the CDU, CSU and the FDP? Would they even sort of have more ambitious policies?
I think if Laschet wins and the Green Party is a strong coalition member with them, that would be an acceleration of climate policies, because the Green Party would insist that the coal phase out be pulled forward, probably a internal combustion engine ban be announced. I mean, Germany has an informal one in place and all the car makers have announced that they'll stop making these, but the Greens would want that in. I mentioned the speed limit and probably an extension in some form of renewable subsidies, whereas the Liberals, they want to get rid of them as fast as possible because they say we don't need them anymore. The SPD has turned very pro-climate as well, and I mean the SPD and the Green Party together, that would also form a strong climate push in Germany. So actually, that means that the outcome is probably we'll see an acceleration of climate policies in Germany, because the Conservatives would have to do that as a concession to the Green Party. and the SPD wants to do it together with the Green Party, and the FDP would have to just swallow that pill and say, well, if we get the finance ministry in return, we'll be silent and tolerate this.
Yeah, we'll return to that in a minute. But what does that mean in concrete terms on the ground? Does it mean like you tighten the emissions targets for 2030, for example, that you actually, like you say, high carbon prices maybe mean the end for these coal plants anyway, but maybe you accelerate that or review that target? Those are sort of more concrete terms. Do you expect those to happen?
Yes. So, I mean, the EU ETS is under review in Brussels anyway on how to go forward. So I'd suspect the new German government will support a tightening of the carbon scheme, in particular, reducing the amount of remaining free allowances, taking those out of the system much faster. And that would, of course, increase the carbon price pretty much immediately. In fact, I talked to a couple of utilities and industrials in Germany in early September, and they were all saying that they have an internal carbon price now of around 90 to 100 euros per ton for 2025 and 150 plus for 2030. And that is what they measure their investments against.
Okay.
And that is why I meant coal will be out of the system before 2038. Natural gas looks really challenged in that environment as well. You can probably keep a few of them as peakers to, expensive peak hours like now, probably. But you don't build a natural gas-fired power station that operates a couple of days a year. That's not a good investment case. So and this is the case for the clean energy and storage investment. That means invest into green hydrogen. You'll get subsidies for it and do it fast. And offshore wind probably has a good chance. And so, the concrete measures, tightening the carbon trading scheme is probably the most immediate one. And it has support. The French support the idea, the Benelux do. I think Spain does. I think the only ones who really oppose it is Poland, but they I don't think stand a good chance because of the majority.
Exactly, of scuppering this kind of tightening of the ETS. Germany's establishment is a big fan of the Schwarze Null, which is a balanced federal budget, a black zero, if you like. So an FDP, we talked about if they get the finance ministry, so they could be expected to advocate this. And even the SPD's Scholz has enjoyed being sort of identified with that. But is that incompatible with what you're talking here about, the rollout of renewables, the investments needed in storage, in green hydrogen infrastructure, all this? Can they coexist, if you like?
Tricky. It's a good point to raise because the SPD would probably not be married to that Schwarze Null for much longer. Scholz might be, but that's what I meant. He's not very popular within his own party. The left-leaning segments of the SPD doesn't want anything to do with it. Neither do the Green Party. The Linkspartei, the left party, has no desire in that direction. So as you say, it's only the Liberals. So if they get into government, they might try and get a concession from the Green Party and the Social Democrats to make an effort towards it. But I am quite certain the ambition to keep that black zero in place would go out the window under an SPD chancellery. Only with Laschet and the CDU in government does it stand any chance. And even then, it looks a little bit shaky because of the Green Party that'll be in government. So the only chance of having that anywhere near in place is if the Liberal Democrats are in the government, and they look like they'd be they almost certainly be the weakest link in a coalition. So they could try and enforce some discipline, but not on a major scale. And interestingly, of course, that would also mean that Germany exerts less pressure on other EU countries to keep their budgets under control. So I actually suspect in many corridors of power in the rest of the EU, people are hoping for a Social Democrat government. Macron seems to be much in favor of Scholz,
because then they can sort of unleash their spending plans,
yes.
which is kind of needed in this, in the recovery post-COVID and also the green transition.
Yeah, I mean, it costs a lot of money, and the economy is broken, and the green transition costs money. Like you say, it's we're not going to get around spending, and that probably means to reap taxes up somewhere in some areas. Again, Liberals won't like that at all, but it probably will happen.
You mentioned gas and gas-fired plants. What's the role of, even if, as happens, Nord Stream 2 comes online? We can talk a little bit more about that later. But what's the role of gas within Germany now from the perspective of the next German government?
I think it's involuntarily important. Nobody really wants to, because the European Development Bank, the European Commission says natural gas plays no long-term role in Europe. But because Germany's its energy transition has been so lopsided, in favor of renewables and coal, that they need to do something now, and the nuclear exit. There is a need in the next couple of years for natural gas in Germany. Whether one likes it or not doesn't really matter. The need is there. Britain, interestingly, has had a much more success in this area. I mean, 10 years ago, Britain's and Germany's coal-fired generation was the same. And now Britain has almost zero left, and Germany is still quite significant. So I know a lot of Germans are very proud of the German energy transition, but it's gone wrong in some areas, and gas has a role to play there. It also, of course, because of the pipeline system, has some role to play in the transition towards clean hydrogen. And even Nord Stream 2, if you talk to Gazprom, they'll very politely tell you that Nord Stream 2 could carry quite a lot of hydrogen if you want to. But then that, of course, turns to blue hydrogen, which is much less popular. And there's some serious doubts that the Russians have the capacity to actually create clean hydrogen from their natural gas fields.
If I can pin you down on Nord Stream 2, Henning, do you expect it to be online this year?
So I think they'll put gas into it this year, but whether they'll be delivered to customers, I doubt it, because the regulatory approval process is so sticky. And this year is not that long anymore. I mean, it's only talking for a couple of months. So no, I doubt it. I think it won't become commercially operational this year. I think it'll be 2022. That said, if there's a serious energy crisis this winter, and there are some people who look at the gas storage, it looks terrible. And if it gets very, very cold, and then there's some outage somewhere else, and the Russians play the game well and say, sorry, Ukraine, you can't do that, then Nord Stream 2 might need to be fast-tracked, of course. I mean, it's probably easier than, I don't know, delaying a nuclear exit. That is very unpopular in Germany. So, and if you need the gas over outages, I mean, you'll take the gas, even if it's from Russia.
And you think that's a possibility, that there's an opening that it could be fast-tracked if you hit that crisis point? If it's very cold in December, January, lack of LNG and outages on the power side, no wind, for example, our old friend, the Dunkelflaute.
Exactly. It's dark and it's not windy and it's bloody cold. And the Chinese are buying LNG like there's no tomorrow because their gasification is ongoing. And the Asian spot energy price suddenly is $40 per MMBTU, then I think there is a chance. I don't think it's a high one because nobody wants it that early. No one wants to fast track it. The Americans would go berserk over it. But if it's that or outages, it's going to be Nord Stream 2. And it's ready. I mean, so the Russians say we could put the gas in next week. Maybe not next week, but I mean, by October, I think they're saying. So there is a chance, yes.
It's more likely that it'll be fast-tracked, that Nord Stream 2 will be fast-tracked, than you'll switch on the nuclear plants again.
Much more likely.
Yeah.
I actually think switching on old nuclear power plants is an impossibility because you need safety inspections and the regulation is so tight around it. And it's unpopular. I mean, Nord Stream 2 fast-track would be unpopular as well, but it's an interesting point to raise because nobody wants to discuss it, but it is the option to solve a problem in a really cold winter supply crunch, and Russia knows that, and we suspect that's what they're playing at.
Okay, interesting. Another issue, and which is related to sort of these regulatory factors, Henning, is the slow process of the permitting processes for big high voltage transmission lines, which to transport all the renewable energy to the area where they need it in Germany, which is generally from north to south. Do you see that could be accelerated, or that the government can put in sort of fast track processes there?
Tricky because you need to work with local governments and local populations who don't. This is the German NIMBY problem. Nobody wants power lines in their backyard, the big ones, and putting them underground is even more challenging. So I think that would be almost impossible to fast track that really fast. I mean, one thing that doesn't get discussed a lot is Germany's geographical advantage of having 9 land borders and having 2 hydro reserves accessible from the north and from the south. Germany could just suck in from all their neighbors and export their problem. Not very popular, but that is, I mean, that's what the European market was designed for. So they've got a lot of interconnectors. So they could start importing electricity from France, from the Alps, from Nordics, from everywhere. And then price there goes up.
Yeah, exactly. Price goes up everywhere. So I think we're in for some quite interesting times going forward in the months until a new German government is formed. And I think, as you've highlighted here very well, Henning, the ramifications for energy policy, not just within Germany, but Europe, are huge. So thank you very much for joining the Montel Weekly podcast today, Henning. And we look forward to having you on again.
Great. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks.
So listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or, let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.